What are we going to do today? First of all, I would like to introduce shortly Solventure, and then the professionals we have invited today to attend to the webinar, Mesters, Martijn Lovfers and Bram Desmet, will shortly introduce themselves. What is their role, what is their specialism, and last but not least, why did they accept the invitation to take part of the webinar? And next we will start with the questions we have defined. For Mesters it is, suppose you are a supply chain professional, what are the most important economic trends you have to deal with and what could be the influence of Trump? And for Martijn Lovfers, what are the most important supply chain trends to deal with, and again, what is the possible influence of Trump? And for Bram Desmet, how can your organization deal with all those economic and supply chain trends, and how can sales and operations planning be useful to adapt your organization to all those challenges? And after Han, Martijn and Bram have shared their vision and knowledge with you related to the questions, they will give their opinion about the next statement. Supply chain management makes organizations flexible. That's why Trump is a blessing. Now supply chain professionals can prove what they're worth. And after that, there's time for you, the audience, to come with your questions. Okay, let's start with a small introduction of Solventure, and I begin at the top left corner. We provide a full range of S&OP solutions that are a combination of analytics, advice, tooling and implementation. We work with your people to define your S&OP processes and configure the state-of-the-art solutions to perfectly suit your situation. The preferred tooling for this is the Akiva Supply Chain Suite, Challenger according Gartner. You see it in the right and left corner under. And then I go to the triangle in the center of the circle. That's the famous supply chain triangle. Supply chain management is about finding the right balance per product market combination and supply chain between services, cost and cash based on ROCE, return on capital employed. For those who are interested, Professor Dr. Bram Desmet, the founder of Solventure, has written several white papers about the supply chain triangle. You can find it on SlideShare or send me an email and I will send to you. Solventure uses the power of sales and operations planning to turn your supply chain into a competitive edge. The goal is always the same, to find the right balance in the supply chain triangle with the power of sales and operations planning. And how do we do that? And then I go to the outside ring, to combine processes, tooling, analytics, and last but not least, people. And of course, at the end, we integrate our S&OP modules with your existing ERP system. The result is an easy-to-use, highly effective S&OP solution based on the steps of a good and complete S&OP processes, as you see in the middle ring of the circle, that people like to use. It drives improved services at reduced cost with less capital, so it empowers you to add more value and gain a competitive edge. And here you see an overview of our customers. I would like to attend you to Owens Kerning. You see them in the left column by chemical and processes. Together with Solventure, a representative of Owens Kerning will offer you a workshop about demand management during the Supply Chain Day on April the 12th in Scherpenzeel. At the end of this webinar, I will give you more information about that. And last but not least, the introduction of Solventure Live and Solventure Academy. Solventure Live is specialized in optimizing the sales forecast by including leading indicators like macroeconomic or weather information into forecasting practice, resulting in an advanced business insight, market knowledge and improved forecast accuracy. And Solventure Academy takes care of training, bootcamps and education based on the supply chain triangle about relevant sales and operations topics like product segmentation, demand management, inventory, supply and executive S&OP. And now the introduction of our guests, Mesters, Martijn Lovfers and Bram Desmet. Han, could you be so kind to introduce yourself shortly? What is your role, what is your specialism, and why did you accept the invitation to take part of the webinar of today?
Yes, of course, Michel. My name is Han Mesters. Within ABN-AMRO Bank, I'm responsible for one of the sectors, the business service sector, and it's good for you to know that we as a bank have decided that within the corporate bank, we have decided that knowledge about sectors will be our unique selling point. Of course, the business service segment is relatively wide in terms of diversity of activities. There's staffing companies, accountants, lawyers, consultants. So basically it's all about the question, how do I get most out of my highly educated professional? It's about professionals mainly. And then of course you have to ask yourself, how do I make these professionals more effective? And that's the bridge to this meeting, to this webinar. Of course, logistics and supply chain management ways of reasoning are very important for the business service segment to improve the efficiency of these highly educated employees. That's one thing. The other thing is, and I will expand on that a bit later during my part of the presentation, we see that culture also is very important. And to make the bridge to Trump, I think we are in a very interesting era, often expressed as we are not in a era of change, but in a change of era. And I think Trump will certainly give a lot of surprises going forward, and that's one of the reasons that companies really have to be flexible.
Okay, Jan. Martijn, next to you. Could you be so kind to introduce yourself shortly? What is your role, your specialism, and why did you accept the invitation to take part to the webinar?
Yes, of course. Thanks. My name is Martijn Lovfers. I'm the CEO and Chief Trendwatcher of Supply Chain Media. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of the European Quarterly Supply Chain Movement, and people might know me of my mind maps and subway maps. They are very well famous in the world. Anyway, well, the reason I'm here, I can't stress too often that supply chain management is very important. That's the counterpart of a commercial, and supply chain management and commercial together make the business. So supply chain deliver on the commercial promises to the customer. So I can't express too often that's the importance of supply chain management. And well, Trump, yeah, said before, it's a very distinguished shift in mindsets, that things are changing in the political era, and it has a huge impact on supply chain, and I will well, talk about it later on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you everybody. Now Han, Martijn and Bram will share their knowledge related to the question I mentioned before. And the first of all is Mr. Han Mesters, who is going to start. Again, the question, suppose you are a supply chain professional, what are the most important economic trends you have to deal with, and what could be the influence of Trump? Okay, Han, go ahead.
Okay, well, normally I'm somebody who has a lot of time and a zillion of slides. Now I have 3 slides, so that kind of forced me to make the message very concise and brief, which is a good thing. So what is the most important thing that's happening? Well, first of all, we see that the global trade is slowing down, and that of course has an impact on the global GDP product. Global trade in the end drives economic growth. But there's more going on. So if you look at the first slide, you see a summary of the results of the largest US listed companies called the S&P 500. And those are companies in all kinds of different sectors, industries. And what you see on the top left picture is that these companies, these listed companies, are struggling to generate growth of profit, what they call EPS growth, earnings per share, in good Dutch, winst per aandeel. And that is after they did all the cost restructuring, firing people, etc., etc. So that's a scary thing. And this picture shows you from June 2010 till now, basically. The right side of the slide, the bottom right side picture, is even more worrying, because there it's being shown that these same group of companies, these 500 S&P 500 companies in all kinds of sectors, they also struggle to generate turnover growth, sales growth, measured from 2001. So the conclusion is that organic growth is very difficult for these companies. Basically, it also tells you that the business models are over. So they struggle with innovation, to come up with new ways to make money. And that's a nice bridge to the second slide of my presentation. This is a recent slide from a Boston consulting group research among large companies. And actually the research shows that large companies need 2 capabilities. First of all, they need to be able to be very good in exploitation, but they also need to be very good in exploration. Exploitation is what they call the old-fashioned managerial world. So it's about efficiency, processes, KPIs, short-term, results-oriented, earnings-oriented, if you like. And the other world is about exploration. It's about innovation, experimenting, embracing the outside world. So to make a long story short, those competencies, exploitation and exploration, are completely different from each other. And most of the large companies have all their competencies, let's say, in the exploitation world only. So there's an enormous exploration capability gap. The Boston Consulting research shows you that only 2% of the companies investigated in the survey are capable of managing both worlds, so both the exploitation world as the exploration world. In a world where the need for new business models becomes more and more important, the lack of exploration related capabilities is really a problem. And we're talking about innovation here. We're talking about different profiles. The exploitation world is what we call very analytical, what they call blue in terms of colors. What you need is different capabilities. And this is not a single industry problem. This is across many industries. If we go to the next slide, then of course I tried to become a bit more conceptual and macroeconomic. This lack of innovation by large companies is a bit of a problem, because at the same time you see different ways of coordinating knowledge and production and work. So Pricewaterhouse came with 3 very interesting scenarios about the future of work, and the first scenario is what they call the orange world. Actually, that's a result based on the fact that large organizations are not efficient. So the traditional command and control model is not working anymore. So large organizations in this scenario will break up into smaller, more effective entities. And actually you see that happening. If you look at the number of jobs being created by large companies, it's really a problem, not just in the Netherlands, but all over the world. So that's one scenario. Small is beautiful, the orange world. The other world is a bit of a scary scenario. It's called the blue world, and it says corporate is king. So that means basically that the large organizations will continue to grow with fewer people, with more use of advanced technology, but nevertheless they will remain big and let's say have most of the global market share. So in this scenario, every industry will be dominated by 4 or 5 global players, and there's not much opportunity for the smaller companies. Kind of a horror scenario, if you like. Then there's a third trend and also a third scenario if you look at the future of work, and we see that of course within our bank. It's called the green world. It's about companies that embrace the circular economy and that have business models that are based on social responsibility. So basically it addresses the question, why are we on earth as a company? It's a question many companies face. More and more companies realize it's not only about creating as much profit as possible, maximizing shareholder wealth. Most companies are embracing people, planet, profit, and some younger companies that we see are based on the fact that their reason of existence is based on the fact that they want to solve problems in society. Social responsibility. Social enterprises also called. We see this growing very fast, and of course profit still is important for these companies, but it's not the only thing that they are being driven by. Well, if you look at the Trump connection, Trump basically is killing global growth. You can ask yourself, are we in a period that is peak globalization? So have we seen the end of globalization? Will corporate activity become more local, more regional? I think the combination of Trump and technologies like 3D printing will most certainly lead to a world where supply chain will be completely different. Think of 3D printing, for example, houses are being printed, organs are being printed. If you have a dryer where there's one part broke, then in the old days you had to order a new part from America or Asia, and there was a complete complex supply chain behind that. Now with 3D printing you see that this can be solved locally. And so supply chain will become very, very different in the next 15 to 20 years. I think so far my brief analysis of Trump in relation to global trends, and I would like to hand over the floor to my colleague Martijn.
Okay, hi. I've summed up the main trends in supply chain, and these trends, are going on in the last 5 years. So when we start at the top and counterclockwise, I'll go through them. We have a global sales market, and that means you have new markets and more customization worldwide. You have longer supply chains. You can argue that they will be shortened in the near future, part of 3D printing and nearshoring. We'll get back to that. You get new competitors from all over the world. If you are going to China or Brazil, you will introduce also competitors from the local market, and they grow big also very quickly. And you see more and more trade barriers, and we'll get back to Trump in that area. That's becoming more and more important. So that's the link to this topic of this afternoon. And you get trade links where you get ways of government who are participating with each other. For example, with China and the Netherlands, we have trade lanes, green lanes, where you can import from Hong Kong all the way, and in the paperwork being done in Hong Kong, you can have your goods all the way with no delay into Germany. So that quickens your supply chain enormously. And next to that, in sustainability, it's getting more and more important. It's going on, but it will be bigger in the next decade, I guess, and I see. That means for supply chain, there's a more importance on the reverse chain management. How do you get your goods back into the supply chain? And the carbon footprint has to go down, but that has been going on for ages, but now we're going to be measured upon it. And a new thing is cradle to cradle. So how do you make sure that your raw material will be reused after being used of your products? And so you can scrap your products, but you can reuse the raw material again in your supply chain. And that's a challenge. How do you make sure you have enough new raw material out of this supply chain of reused products? Cost of fuels and raw materials going up and down. Well, you have to hedge it. It's a kind of risk in supply chain. And of course, in the IT area, open source software is coming up, and IT, well, the importance is being more and more important. A major issue for the next decade is the cost of RFID has dropped down enormously. So you have RFID tags for less than €1, and it's been variable. And now finally we are into the phase where we get global supply chain visibility, because we have interconnectivity. RFID is well, it's not so expensive anymore, and we have the connection through internet, so that makes it all able to get a supply chain visibility of all your individual goods around the world. In the financial area is tax and customs becoming more important, also related to Trump and trade barriers and that kind of stuff. Supply chain risk management is becoming more and more important. When you outsource a lot, then you have to hedge your risk and be aware of all kinds of risk, not only in natural disasters, but also the dependency on suppliers. And well, a new thing is supply chain finance. How do you finance your suppliers? And last but not least, you go to outsourcing and offshoring. That's the hardcore supply chain environment. Outsourcing of logistics and manufacturing is still going on. When you see in the pharma area, a lot of companies are looking for outsourcing the logistics, but there are not enough 3PL companies who are certified to do that. So that's a challenge. You have a larger dependency on suppliers around the world because of the outsourcing. It has also an impact on competition from chain to chain. And network design is a frequent issue. You have to do a frequent network design. You have to check it every half year if your network is still the optimal one. And especially when we talk about global trade, there will be so much shifts in the world that you have to check probably every quarter your network if you have to open up or close down factories and warehouses. And finally, you see a trend of insourcing and reshoring and onshoring. So you have outsourced, a lot of companies have outsourced a lot to India and China, and supply chain is getting too long. They can't respond that quickly, so they have to move back their stuff and outsource near to Turkey or Morocco or Eastern Europe for European matters. And what does it all mean? 10 or 20 years ago, it was all about operation logistics, the lowest cost please, and that's fine. But now you have to have a supply chain strategy as a company. If not, you will fail in the past. So that's the main message. So you have to have a supply chain strategy. And to Well, I'll go through this quickly. What is a supply chain strategy? You have your customer needs in the middle, the buyer behavior, and then based on that, you have to decide which direction you want to go. Is it product leadership, is it customer intimacy, or operational excellence? And operational excellence, that's the lowest cost area, the yellow one. And product leadership is the purple one. And the red one is customer intimacy. Those are different directions. And based on these strategies, we have linked certain 6 supply chain types. And the main message is, you have to be flexible. One supply chain doesn't fit all for all your categories or all your geographies. So you have to choose which supply chain types you have to use for certain product categories and also for certain geographies. Can you imagine when you're growing in Nigeria, you have a totally different approach than you go to the Netherlands or the UK or Germany. So as a supply chain leader, you have to choose wisely, and this is the framework. And you see all kind of logos of companies. That's the DNA of the company where they have started with, but now they have stretched all their businesses to all kind of supply chains. So this strategy compass you see is a way of having discussion internally what should be the direction we are going to as a company, servicing our customers, and what kind of supply chains are attached to that. And you have all kind of rings about organizational structure, processes, and behavior and KPIs. So the supply chain director has to know what the company is doing, how they are serving, and what kind of supply chain they have. And the final thing is you have different supply chains. As I mentioned, one supply chain doesn't fit all. So you see 3 examples of companies: Disney, Starbucks, and PepsiCo. For example, PepsiCo, you have 2 different categories: Quaker Oats and Lay's chips, and they have different strategies and different supply chains. So my main message is do know which supply chain you have to use for certain industries and categories and geographies. And that's why it's important because the world is changing, and the product life cycles of products are changing, and supply chain leader has to know what does it mean for supply chain to deliver to the customer. That's for me for now.
Okay, thank you, Martijn. Now we'll pass over to Bram Desmet. He will give answer to the question and his vision about it, but he will also introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bram Desmet, CEO of Solventure. Next to my role at Solventure, also part of my time linked to the Vlerick Business School in Belgium, where I'm teaching supply chain and more quantitative courses like statistics and operations research. Most interested in this topic, I think, as it relates very well to S&OP, and that's of course the core topic of Solventure. So let's jump into that story. I think the story of Martijn and Han is on how as companies the future will be different from the past, and there's a lot of change coming up. And if we look at Trump, probably Trump is one of those change accelerators who steps in with a completely different vision on how the world should operate. And that vision is not necessarily aligned with what, let's say, many of the Western people might have thought what the future was going to look like. So on the one hand, there's a lot of change coming up. And at the same time, I think that's also what Han mentioned, many companies are focused on exploitation. So probably many of the processes we have are really focused on control, and control kind of has the connotation that it's focused on the past, where we need to be open for change, and we will need to evolve as a company to remain competitive in the new world ahead of us. So how do we do that? I believe that S&OP is one of the key ways to do that. Why? Because in the end, S&OP is about making better use of information. The different steps are over there. Customer product segmentation is really about what are my different types of customers, what are my different types of products, and how might I pursue, as Martijn has shown, a different strategy across those product market combinations. It's about product management review. How do I stay in sync of which products really add value and which should be taken out of the portfolio. What are the things that are really adding value and what is just, let's say, a burden we take along from the past. Demand review, which is about forecasting. Inventory review, which is on the one hand setting intelligent inventory parameters, but at the same time also doing a close monitoring and follow-up. Supply review, which is supply planning on different levels of detail, the more tactical planning, the more operational planning, and the day-to-day scheduling. And then executive S&OP, which tries to make sure that it's the executive team which controls and steers the business. And S&OP as a whole process is really about making better use of information to make more intelligent decisions in your company. So relating back to Trump, and Trump again just as an example, well, through the S&OP, it's key to have good what-if scenarios. I've just shown us a couple of examples there, like, well, we might expect some reshoring from Asia back to the US. On the one hand, because of robotics or because of 3D printing, but simply also because of import barriers that Trump will probably call into life. There might be increased spending on defense and military in Europe. We are all aware that Trump was not a very big fan of the NATO, at least, let us say, both the Netherlands and Belgium underspending on their defense. So we can expect this to go up. In general, increased volatility by geopolitical tensions, right? We have different world leaders for different bigger continents, which are not necessarily looking for consensus. So we can expect to have some tensions coming up the coming 2 to 3 years, which will probably create a lot of volatility. And if on the short term we want to make efficient use of our assets, being able to quickly react to those tensions and to that volatility will be key in surviving as a company. It's even as simple as that. So linking back to S&OP and the scenarios, so for each of the blocks, we simply need to ask ourselves a couple of questions, right? Customer product segmentation. If you look at the scenarios, well, what will be the impact on our customer product portfolio? Will we see sales shifting from Asia to the US? What will be the impact on sales to individual customers? Do I have some customers in defense, just to name something? What is the impact on the importance of certain products, right? If we are going to reshore, do I have low-end product being made in China, which will be difficult for me to import into the US? So for each of the scenarios you've defined, assessing the impact on your existing customer and product portfolio is certainly a first stepping point. In the end, if you want to run scenarios, you will need to assess the impact on your demand. Which demand is likely to go up, which demand is likely to go down. There is a lot of uncertainty, so you will not be solely able to rely on statistics. You will need to ask some of your experts, and there are known techniques in demand planning like the Delphi technique, where you ask different people to give their forecast and to document the underlying assumptions. You make it an anonymous process to make sure that nobody knows which figure comes from the CEO and what are his assumptions. And then you do a couple of iterations to really define, let us say, as good as possible demand scenarios and upsides and downsides. You can use leading indicators as a demand sensing technique, right? So we know that each of our industries is depending on other industries. Michel has introduced in the beginning that we have a leading indicator forecasting product, which allows you to connect into the indicators of downstream industries. And short follow-up of actuals to track demand realization. Given the volatility, you know that the long-term forecast will always be wrong, but at least having a scenario and then being able to do a close monitoring whether it will be the downside or the upside scenario and kind of implementing the decisions which you have already preempted. All of this is part of dealing with the Trump-like world. Inventory scenarios, do you need strategic stocks of any key raw materials or finished products? Do we want to create a cash buffer to anticipate a slowdown of the market? So what are the tactics over there? Supply review assess the impact on supply planning. So if I need to scale up or scale down, where will consolidate that. And in the end, you want to make those decisions with your executive team in the executive SIOP, where you assess risk versus reward of the defined demand, inventory, supply scenarios. You decide on a base scenario, and then you will do close monitoring and follow-up on which scenario, let's say, the real world seems to navigate. So we've done some work on that supply chain triangle, which really shows that supply chain is about balancing the service cost and cash, or more in general capital employed of companies, and service is a driver for turnover. The combination of turnover and cost will lead to a profit, and the profit you realize over the capital employed gives a return metric like the return on capital employed. And a lot of operational metrics, you could see that as diagnostic metrics, because your forecast accuracy going down because of increased volatility, that will negatively impact service costs, and it will require more inventory. So when you assess the impact of your scenarios, make sure that you assess that impact on each of the topics which is shown here, right? In the short term, we need to make smart decisions like strategic stocks, yes or no, anticipate where we will increase or decrease capacity to react to certain demand changes, and at the same time making sure that we keep, let us say, our top line, bottom line and return targets on where we promise them to be towards financial markets. This is really the last slide, which just shows an example of an exercise we have done with one of our customers on, if I start running scenarios, how do I, let us say, compile that information in an intuitive way also for senior management to make sure that they understand that supply chain will be a core capability to steer their business through that uncertain future. And if you look at supply chain, SNOP is probably one of the key processes because it really ties in the more strategic questions into tactics and drives that through to operation. So that was my short introduction of myself, and let's say linking that the Trump effect to SNOP as a process.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Han. Thank you, Martijn and Bram. Now we go to our statement of today. The statement of today is: supply chain management makes organizations flexible. That's why Trump is a blessing. Now supply chain professionals can prove what they're worth. And maybe I can start with you, Martijn, because you are one of the leaders in the supply chain world. Did you thought about, what is your opinion about this statement?
Yes, of course, but I would I would think differently. You know, I think that supply chain management are not so flexible. You know, they doesn't make organizations flexible. They should be doing that. But I would put it differently. I think that Trump is forcing companies, the supply chain, to create supply chains being flexible. So, you know, a lot of companies are still not flexible enough. They are still in the old school thinking. They have still one supply chain for their whole organization. And someone like Trump forces companies to approach it totally different. So it is a blessing in disguise in the matter of that supply chain professionals are being forced to think differently from supply chain that doesn't fit all to all the categories. So that's what I think. Yeah. So it's a new force for the supply chain professionals.
You make a differentiation between the company on the one side and the professional on the other side.
Yes, but the professionals are forcing organizations to change, and if they are doing well, they will get there. They get their influence on a higher level to make that change. So first of all, organizations have to see that supply chain is strategic, and the next thing is that because of these political changes around the world, supply chain professionals and the whole organization are forced to become more flexible and agile and switch to different supply chains when things are changing around the world.
Okay. What is your opinion about the statement?
Yeah, that's interesting. You see a new type of corporate activity emerging called the peer-to-peer economy. Famous examples are Airbnb and Uber, of course, what they also called leveraged companies, in that sense that assets is no longer relevant. The only thing these companies do is connecting demand with supply, and they use the assets of individuals. And this is disrupting the traditional hotel business, the traditional the taxi business, potentially also the transportation business. So I think that's the big picture situation that's happening, but with technology actually disrupting many business models. The question is if Trump is reinforcing this process or stopping this process. That's very hard for me to see. What worries me more is that the US, as kind of the global leader, becomes unstable also internationally, and that will create a lot of international uncertainty, but of course will have impact on the supply chain. So uncertainty is here to stay, has supply chain impact, but the biggest driver will not be Trump, but will be technology. And the other thing is that, well, you have to ask yourself, if you look at this new world of, let's say, peer-to-peer based economies, how fast will this go? If you look at the people of the Singularity University who talk about exponential change, then everybody's saying, yeah, I understand the concept of exponential change, but it's still not going fast enough. So the pain is different from industry to industry. If you look at the financial sector, we certainly feel the pain. If you look at the media sector, we feel the pain. If you look at the retail sector, the pain is there with enormous supply chain impact. And the other side, of course, in this discussion of technology is that a lot of the supply chain management processes are being controlled by ERP systems, mainly the bigger ERP systems provided by SAP. And this is not going to be an advantage for these companies, because the way to change processes given these heavy SAP systems is very difficult. Once these processes are implemented in these systems, it actually reduces your agility. So we see a lot of opportunities for smaller companies with different ERP technology, more web-based technologies, to beat the traditional players.
Okay. If we go back to the first part of your explanation, you mentioned 3 scenarios. Your answer on this statement, does it mean that you will advise people in the organization the orange scenario? Small is beautiful?
I think the smaller beautiful is actually happening. It's a process that is what they call creative destruction, which and the speed is different from industry to industry, as I just explained. I think the green scenario is also happening, whether we like it or not. Circular economy and ESP type of doing business there, so social responsible entrepreneurship is becoming more important. And the traditional companies have problems in adjusting to that new circular economy based way of working. Okay. And that's because they're still in a stranglehold, a hard grip of the investors.
Does it mean that the business between PPG and Excel, for example, you would say don't do it?
Oh, that's interesting. Private equity and of course venture capital, they are the embodiment of the old economic thinking, in the sense that get as much profit as possible out of it and fire as many people as possible. I think there will be a counter reaction where this industry will have enormous problems from an ethical point of view.
Okay. Bram,
if I look at my experience, I think in general some companies only change when there is an external factor which forces them to change. And I'll give a different example. Next to Trump, I've witnessed how companies changed their attitude towards inventory or working capital in general before and after the financial crisis. So before the financial crisis, I saw a lot of companies where inventory was making huge swings. And we all know from the lean philosophy that inventory is used to kind of hide problems, right? So if you lower the inventory, the problems surface, and then you really need to tackle the problems. And a lot of companies were forced during the financial crisis to lower their inventories, to generate cash. And in doing that, they had to solve a lot of problems. Yeah? Instead of having disconnected steps in the operations, they had to connect that, and they needed to come with a more holistic planning of the full end-to-end supply chain to be able to sustain that lower inventory. If I look at how companies work today, I see first of all that financial people are much more concerned with continuously low working capital levels, but I also see that salespeople are more aware. I see that product management people are more aware. And I also see that production people are more aware that instead of managing inventory as a result, inventory is now really a part of the equation. Yeah? And we have built in the crisis period a capability to continuously work with lower inventories. Yeah? And that doesn't mean that individual companies from time to time have to work on let us say, getting the working capital back under control. But in general, my impression from my experience is that companies have made a step change there in that capability because of the financial crisis. And from that perspective, I do believe, and I'm very hopeful that some of that increased uncertainty, all of a sudden being faced with import tariffs, increased local production in the US, whether it's good or bad for the long-term economic performance of the global economy, I will leave that to Han. But in general, it will put pressure on companies to make the supply chains more agile. And I think, as Han also told, in the past, many companies have invested in quite monolithic systems, which have, instead of made them agile, let us say, made them very prone to changes in their market and in their supply chain. So I'm quite hopeful that Trump indeed is a blessing because it will force companies to be more agile in their supply chain. So I'm not necessarily looking forward to the economic consequences of some of the decisions, but from a supply chain perspective, I do believe it's good news. I think that's my take on it.
Okay, Bram, thank you very much. I look to my colleague Deborah. Are there some questions already?
What is the key link of exploration and supply chain strategy?
I think that's a typical question for our Professor Lovfers.
Well, you introduced it. So now first, and I'll.
Yeah, no problem. The key link between exploration, so that's the left side of the slide I showed, and supply chain. Well, exploration is the old existing world, and the other world, exploitation, is prepared for the new world, and supply chain management strategy should be preparing for the new world. So many industries are caught by the past, right, and a stranglehold by the past, but you should be focusing on the future, also with supply chain management. So that also means if the future is uncertain, then an integral part of supply chain management strategy is working with scenarios. You don't know how the world is going to look like, so you better have a scenario ready for every type of world and also a supply chain process that fits that world.
And getting back to my strategy compass, you have product life cycles and they become shorter and shorter. When you introduce a new product, you might be linked to the customer of the product leadership area, but in the end of life cycle of a product, you have to shift your category, your product, to an operational excellence to keep the profit on a certain margin. So that's the link. So you will ramp up new products. And you have to have a strategy. Where do you going to introduce a product? What kind of strategy, and what kind of supply chain is linked to that?
Okay, thank you. Let's have a look at the other questions.
Will Trump help to have a better co-working environment between different departments within a company, like sales, finance, and operations? Maybe you have an answer there?
Well, talking about politics, a lot of people have different opinions about being against Trump or not. Or, I see that there's also a lot of impact of Erdogan in Europe. So talking about that, it's very, very scary if you talk about politics internally. But if you talk about sales and operations planning on a business level, then it's a good sign to talk about what's the impact. So I would say, leave aside the politics and talk about the economic impact, and then you have a good and necessary conversation. And then sales and operation planning is well-fitted environment as a process to do that. So yeah, don't talk too much about the core politics, but do talk about the economic impact, and then you have a good conversation between functional silos in the business.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think Trump is not God, so we shouldn't exaggerate the role of Trump. Two things. My favorite quote these days is a quote by Mark Twain. Politicians and diapers need to be changed frequently for the same reason. That's one. And then the second one is, of course, when Trump started, people are very optimistic about how he was going to change the political system in Washington, draining the swamp, it was called by the Yanks. But recently we saw that Trump is being drained by the swamp. I think of the healthcare plans that didn't go as he expected. So you can really wonder, you know, how long Trump will survive, given the way he's doing things right now. Having said that, as I said before, technology is really changing the world in a fast pace. So I should focus on technology and look at your culture, structure, and leadership. Those are the three things that matter.
Okay. Thank you very much. Maybe is Trump not a good supply chain professional? He isn't flexible enough. I don't know. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the first webinar of Solventure in the Netherlands. I would like to thank everybody for your attention. If you have questions, if you want to share your vision, your opinion with us, please send us a mail. Thank you for the time, and bye-bye.